Well, good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing this morning? How are you guys doing this morning? Okay, there we go. Good. We're awake. This is second hour. We got to sleep in. We're going to have fun, right? Yeah. Okay, can we have fun? Are we allowed? Okay, good. I'm glad. I love fun. So for those of you who don't know, haven't figured it out by now, deduced, I am not Mike Easter. Hair is much shorter, yes. Mike is growing his hair out in anticipation for our new building, and so that's awesome, and we love that. But yeah, if you don't know who I am, my name is Jordan Brown. I am the director of high school ministry here at Antelope Springs Church. Woo, high school. Hi, Marissa. So I've been on staff here in various roles in student ministries for 6 years. But cool little bit of trivia for those of you who don't know, I've actually been attending Antelope Springs since 2002 when my family moved here from Southern California. So I've been here for 13 years, and I'm in it for the long haul, okay? So that's an interesting little bit of trivia, but really that move 13 years ago has done so much to shape my life. I mean, in that time, I had no idea that I was going to come here, find this place, find Antelope Springs, find that God was calling me into ministry, that I would be up here talking to you guys about everything that God's done 13 years later. And it's cool seeing the progression of that. But back then, in 2002, 13 years ago, I had no idea. All I knew was that my parents were forcing me to move. Raise of hands, how many people had to move as a child? Yeah, rough. I mean, that's probably one of the most stressful situations ever. You have to leave your home where you've grown up, the only place that you know of as home. You got to ditch all of your friends and everything that you know and understand. You got to go to a new place, establish a new place in the hierarchy of school. Right? You have to find new friends. You have to do everything. You have to make sure in preparation for the move that every single toy makes it into those boxes on time, because they will leave it behind, and then you get back there and you find out, oh, we lost some stuff in the move. I swear, my mom took toys out of the box. I put those in. I packed those. But anyway, I digress. All I knew back then was the difficulty of it, the stress of it, the worry of it. You know, in the time leading up to the move, the anger I had that why should I give up everything? All I knew was that my life was over. It was complete. I was in 6th grade, or I was going into 6th grade actually, and so I knew that my life was going to be over. I would be on the same level as those first graders. You know, in elementary school, it's their first year there too. It's going to be my first year there. I'm going to be on the same level. I had spent all this time trying to build up my status. I was going to be a fit 6th grader. I was going to be the top dog. My life was over. And where was I moving? I was moving to, what was this place called? Gazelle? Cantaloupe? Like what is this place? Antelope that I'm moving to that my parents are like, oh yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to move to Antelope. Where is that? No one knows where Antelope is. I go up to Rockland and say I'm from Antelope. People still don't know where Antelope is. Like, it's Antelope. And I'm going, my life is over. Now, since then, I've learned where exactly Antelope is. I understand the type of people that are in Antelope, and I understand that our loving church family here. I love each and every one of you guys. I love being here. I love doing this. But 13 years ago, I had no idea. See, now I'm up here and I say, yeah, I moved up here from Chino. People go, wait, what, Chico? No, Chico's north. Chino is south. Where's Chino? What's Chino? I'm like, forget it, never mind. But it's really crazy that to think about those times in our lives when we have to go through situations like that, whether it's some stressful situation that's out of our control, that we aren't able to do anything. You know, your parents are saying, okay, we got to move. Natural disaster happens, a death in the family, something completely out of your control, but those stressful times. Or maybe it's a time where you're actually the one who put yourself in that position. You know, we all make bad decisions. We all make bad choices. We all choose to sin and rebel against the way that we're supposed to go. And there come those times where we're just in a tough spot, where things seem pretty bleak. But here's the thing. God has plans. No matter what, God has plans. And it's that heart of things seeming pretty bleak and trying to hold on to the fact that God has plans. That's where we enter into the story of Esther this morning. We're continuing in our series of the Bible cover to cover in 90 readings. I'm glad that Pastor Mike last week clarified we're doing it in 90 readings. 90-day reading plans, he said, give you 2 grace days usually, but we're doing it in 90 readings, and I'm glad because I don't think I'll be able to do 90 days. Who's behind? Yeah, I think I'm about a week behind, which according to that crazy reading plan is give or take 1 million chapters. So I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to catch up, but I will do 90 readings. That I can do. God gives grace. But we are talking this morning about Esther. And one of the things that is really crazy that I find funny about the Bible, this thing here, is that it doesn't always order things chronologically. The books in the Bible aren't always in chronological order. So we have in order in our Old Testaments, we have Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Whereas Esther actually happens about 30 years before that of Nehemiah. So last week we were talking about Nehemiah, now we're jumping back in time and we're talking about Esther. But it's crazy because 30 years isn't that big of a difference when we're talking about stuff thousands of years ago. It's not too different. So we know kind of a lot of the background going into the story from what we were talking about last week. Right, so we're thinking, okay, there were all the kings of Israel, and Israel just kept going their own way. You know, they'd go to God and they'd say, God, we are going to live our lives for you. We're going to completely devote ourselves to you. You are going to be the one that we follow. Oh, look, a squirrel. And they'd go complete different direction. And they'd come back and go, no, God, for real, this time we're actually, oh, hey, look at that. Something shiny. Like, they'd keep going over and over again, disregarding God, rebelling from him, doing things that he said, hey, you guys, you really need to stop doing that. And they go, yeah, cool, we'll stop doing that, later. We'll do that later. And finally, after hundreds of years, after a long time, God, who is, he's slow to anger, he's abounding in steadfast love. After all that time, he finally says, okay, enough is enough. We got to go on timeout. We gotta take a step back here because this just isn't working. So God allowed, there's the nation of Israel, the promised land, the land that was promised to Abraham by God. They have that nation. God allows the Assyrians to come in and take over the northern part of the country. He allows the Babylonians later to come in and take over the southern part of the country. Most of the people, like a vast majority of the people, are taken into captivity. The ones who are still alive at that point in time, they're taken into captivity. They go to Babylon and they have to live there. A few people are left behind, but very, very few. The cities, they were under siege. They're all destroyed. Some of them are burned down. They're rubble. And for 70 years, Israel is in captivity in Babylon. The weeds are growing over all the land. It's really that land that was promised to Abraham, the land flowing and with milk and honey. It's no good. No one wants it anymore. So 70 years they're in Babylon, and in that time the Babylonian Empire gets overthrown by the Persian Empire. So suddenly they're underneath the Persian Empire, and they say, hey, you know what, you can return to your land. And God, through the prophet, says, hey, everybody, come back, return. It's time to do this for real. You screwed up. That's okay. We had time out. Now it's time to come back, and we're actually going to do this the right way. We're going to do this the way that it was always supposed to be. So come on back to the land. But there were people who said, I don't think I really want to do that. I mean, you can read in Ezra, there were a lot of people who did return and they did obey and do that, but there were so many who stayed behind. He said in those 70 years, they were born in that foreign land. That was the home that they knew. That was the place that they had grown up, and they said, you know what? We got a good enough setup here. We feel good right here, and after all, that God is the one who allowed this to happen in the first place. Why should I return over there? I wonder if God is even with us anymore at all. Maybe we screwed things up too badly. Or maybe this is just our lot in life. Why should I return to Israel? It's interesting to me, one of the really cool things that I love about the story of Esther, you can read the entire book, 10 chapters. You can read the entire thing, and you will never see an explicit mention of God. It never says, and the Lord, blah, blah, blah. The Lord said, the Lord did. God moved in this way. God did this. Hey, pray to God. It never mentions God in the entire book. And we go, what? Really? But it's in the Bible. Isn't that like a requirement? How did they let that one get in there? How is that possible? We need to go and revise our Bibles. No, we don't. But through the entire book, God is never explicitly mentioned. He is in there. We see him working. We see him doing things. We see him orchestrating and weaving things together. We see God in the story of Esther, but we never see his name. We never see him explicitly mentioned in there. And why is that? I believe it's because Israel is in the cone. Do you guys know the cone? The cone of shame. Dogs, cats, animals, if they go into surgery and they have the stitches, they don't want them chewing the stitches, or if there's some sort of thing, you don't want them biting themselves, so they get the cone. Israel's in the cone. Because the cone's for their own good. Really, the cone keeps them safe. It keeps them from harming themselves and keeps them from doing things they really shouldn't be doing. The cone is not a bad thing. It's just really shameful. I feel so bad. I feel so bad for the little puppies in the cone because I'm like, oh, you just want to be free. You just want to. But, anyway, sorry. I'm a dog person. Sorry. But Israel's in the cone. They're in the land that they were sent to because of their rebellion. This entire story does not take place in Israel. It doesn't take place in the place where they were supposed to be. It takes place in the land of the cone. So I believe that's one of the reasons where they never explicitly go out and say, and God was doing this, because there's this feeling of, is God with us? Is God doing things? Can God bring us out of this situation? I mean, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever looked at life and gone, I don't know. Can God help me with this? Can God bring me out of this? Is God even with me anymore? Have I screwed things up so badly that God is not going to help me with this? Things seem bleak, whether it's because of your own decisions, whether it's because of mistakes that you have made and stuff like that, or if it's because of just random occurrence. Life happens. But in those moments, in those situations, there's a lie that tends to creep into our minds. And that lie says that this is too big for God. That lie says this is too much. That lie says that it's up to us to get us out of that. The lie tells us, life gives you lemonades, life gives you lemons, we're supposed to make lemonade. And the thing that God looks at us and he's going, wait, they're trying to make lemonade. They're putting salt in there instead of sugar. I mean, we don't know how to make lemonade. God's the one who knows. God is the one who is able. God is the one who is able to do much more than we could ever dream or imagine. The lie tells us that things are too big for God, that God isn't with us, that God has chosen to ignore us, that God has chosen to let us stay where we are. But the truth is that God is here. That's the fill in the blank on your outlines. You got one little fill in the blank there, and it is that God is here. The truth is, God is here. No matter where you are, God is here. God is with you. There is no place that you can go where God is not. So there is literally, at any point in time, no matter where you're going, if you're sitting here in church, if you're sitting at work, if you're driving to work, if you're in a different country, if wherever you go, there is no point in time where you can think to yourself, I wonder, is God here? Nah, he's probably not here. No, God is here. God is always with us. He doesn't take breaks. He doesn't leave and come back. Whoa, you screwed that up. No, God is here with us all the time. And that is what we are going to see here in the story of Esther. So we're going to jump in there and dive in there, but first, let's pray together. God, I thank you so much for who you are. You are good, you are just, you are love. God, I thank you that you do not leave us where we are, but that you have chosen to redeem us. You have chosen to give us new life in you. God, I thank you for the way that you have orchestrated things, that you weave our lives together. And I ask that you help us to see you working in our lives. I ask that your Spirit this morning would be moving among us, opening up our hearts to receive this message that you have for us. I ask that we could feel your presence more clearly, God, as we engage with your story. We love you, Lord, and we pray this all in your name. Amen. So the story of Esther, like I said, it's 10 chapters long, which is just long enough that I don't think we can read through all of it in the time we have left. So while I like to go through and read through the verses, and I love doing that, instead this morning I'm going to summarize. So I'm going to try and speedball summarize the story of Esther this morning. Who's read or heard the story of Esther before? Raise a hand. Perfect. So for you guys, this is going to be review. For everyone else, this is going to be new stuff. You're going to be like, hey, this is cool. Hopefully we'll all learn something. Oh yeah, Ruth's got Bibles. If you want to be reading and totally tune me out, if God's like, hey, you need to actually read this stuff right now, then do that. I'm not going to stop God from talking to you like that. But yeah, totally. So raise your hand if you would like a Bible. Ruth's got them. But otherwise, here's the story of Esther. We got 4 main characters, right? We got Esther. Big shocker there. Esther's in there. Her uncle Mordecai, right? There's King Xerxes, king of the Persian Empire. And then there is the bad guy, Haman, right? So we got Esther, Mordecai, Xerxes, Haman. So these are the 4 main characters. Here's what happens. Esther is living with her uncle Mordecai. They're in the Persian Empire. They're one of the ones, the Jews, who did not return to Israel. They decided to stay in Persia. Xerxes, the king, he throws a party, and his wife is there, the queen, and she displeases him. So what he says is, you know what, I'm going to go to my advisors, and I'm going to find out what they say I should do. So he goes to his advisors and says, the queen displeased me. What should I do? They say, dump her. Just get rid of her. You know what? Banish her. Just completely toss her out and get a new wife. You have this entire empire with all these women in it. You can choose for yourself any one of them. Just get a new wife. It's like, that sounds like a great idea. You guys are really smart. And so what they do is they actually force young women from their homes, bring them to the capital of Susa, bring them to the palace where they undergo 1 year, an entire year of beauty treatments. At which point they are deemed beautiful enough to go, and they one by one they spend a night with the king. Their only hope is that after that night, they would make such an impression on him that he would remember them and say, you know what, I want this one to be my wife. And that girl actually happened to be Esther. I'm like, hey, cool, that's awesome. Fast forward a little bit, Mordecai he's like traveling around, and he ends up hearing about this plot to assassinate King Xerxes. And he says to himself, you know, I don't think murder is right, so I should go warn them. And so he ends up warning the king that he is about to be assassinated. He reveals this plot, saves the king's life, and we're like, hey, cool, we like Mordecai. He's a good guy. And we're like expecting for him to be rewarded. We're expecting the king to give him 1,000 camels or whatever it is that would be a really awesome reward. But instead, the very next scene that we see is Haman being rewarded. You go, well, what's Haman being rewarded for? Well, he was a high official in the military. He was kind of a top dog there, and he had done some great feat of strength, and so he was being rewarded. Mordecai is not rewarded. He's not given anything for that. And we see Haman, the bad guy, being rewarded. So he's being paraded around the city, and he's being shown off, and all the people are supposed to bow down to him out of respect and do all that stuff. And everyone's bowing down to him and saying praises to him and everything except for Mordecai. Mordecai's just standing there. It doesn't say it, but I have the feeling Mordecai was giving him the stink eye. Right? Mordecai with the stink eye. That's the thing. And so Haman sees that, and Haman's a very prideful and very, very angry man. So Haman sees this, and he just gets so upset. He doesn't even hate Mordecai. It's not just Mordecai. He hates the entire Jewish nation. He hates all the Jews, all of Mordecai's people. He just wants them all gone. So he says, you know what? I have a plan. He goes to the king, stands before the throne of Xerxes, and he says, my king, there is a people in the land. They're horrible, horrible people. They rebel against your rules. They disobey your laws. They make a mess of everything. They're completely ruining your kingdom. It would be much better for you if they were just gone. So if you let me, I can take care of that for you. Xerxes says, you know what? That sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. Do whatever you want. So Haman has his people write up a little edict. The king stamps his ring on it and says, hey, cool, this is from the king. The edict goes out to the entire empire, and it says, on a certain day at the end of the year, everybody is to take up arms against the Jews. They are to take their swords and whatever weapons they have and go against their Jewish neighbors and slaughter them, and then take whatever it is they have. So you get a prize for killing a Jew. I'm like, wow, that's horrible. Yeah, kind of. So the really, really bad thing about this is the edict goes throughout the empire. The Jews are able to read this. And then it's like, oh, hey, edict from the king. Let's find out what it says, honey. Ooh, this isn't good. So Mordecai reads this edict, and he goes, I should probably tell Esther about this. So he goes and he talks to Esther, and they have to speak like through people. They're communicating, having someone send a message and send it back and send a message, and they're doing this. And that's where, like, this is the most famous part of this story. It has the most famous line. Mordecai's going to Esther, Esther, you have to do something. And she explains to him, no, I can't do anything. She says, if I go before the king uninvited, if he doesn't say, hey, I want Esther to come talk to me, if I just show up, then he's supposed to kill me unless he extends his scepter to me and gives me mercy. But I haven't been called to the king in over a month. I haven't talked to him in so long. I have no idea how he feels about me. He totally just threw out his old wife. You think he's going to spare me? I'm taking my life into my hands by going to this guy. And then Mordecai says the famous words of the story. He says, if you don't do this, relief, deliverance for the Jews will come from another way, from another source. But don't think that you and all the people in the castle, that you'll get away unscathed. And who knows, he says, but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. And that's the whole, who put her in royal position? Who's going to be the Redeemer and the bringer of salvation for the Jews? And we go, well, duh, it's God. But he never actually says, God will deliver the Jews. God has put you in this position. It's the strangest thing, even in the most famous things, we never see an explicit mention of God. But he says those words, and she says, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to fast. We're all going to fast around here. And then for 3 days, we're going to do that, and then I'm going to go to the king, and we'll see what happens. So she does that, fasts 3 days, goes to the king. She approaches the throne uninvited, and he extends the scepter to her, spares her life, and allows her to talk to him. And he says, Esther, what's going on? What do you want? What's, like, if you want something, I'll give it to you. What do you want? Just tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. And we think, hey, cool. Not only did she not die, but he's like offering to give her stuff. Well, of course, she's just going to say, hey, look, you know how the Jews are supposed to die? I'm a Jew, and so that's bad because I don't think you just showed that you don't want me to die. So can we do something about that? Instead, what she says is, hey, can you go to dinner with me? Okay. Wives, how many of you have to do that? You go to your husband, can we just have dinner, please? So he says, okay, let's have dinner. And can Haman come too? Okay. You, me, and Haman will hang out, have dinner. So they go to dinner that night. They're there. They're having a great old time. And again, the king's like, Esther, you must want something. You gotta have something in mind. Just ask me for whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. And we're thinking, okay, now she's going to bring it up. She invited Haman so she could say, hey, Haman's the one who did this, and we can get this all sorted out. And she goes, you know, this was really fun. Can we do this again tomorrow night? Can we go to dinner again? We're like, really? Come, just out with it. Come on. Let's get this over with. But then he goes, okay, fine. We'll go dinner. You, me, Haman. It'll be fun. We'll do this. So Haman leaves the dinner that first night, and he's just ecstatic. He's to the moon. He's the only one who was invited to have dinner with the king and the queen. He's like, I am amazing. I'm a really big deal around here. And so he's walking through the town. He's all like, yeah, I am great. And then who does he see but Mordecai? He looks at Mordecai and says, that Jew Mordecai. I can't stand that guy. Oh, I was all happy and I was joyful, and then I saw Mordecai and just everything, I turned bitter, and I can't even stand to be living knowing that Mordecai is alive. So he goes home to his wife and he tells her all these things. I saw Mordecai and it completely sapped all the joy out of me. And she says, well, kill him. That's a great idea. We go, what? Really? So he orders men to start working on a gallows to have Mordecai hanged. And it's supposed to be like 75 feet high so that everyone in the city can see that Mordecai is hanging there. He's like wanting to super kill him. So he starts doing that, and then he goes, oh, wait, you know, if I'm going to kill someone in the king's empire, I should probably ask permission from the king to do that. So, okay. So he heads back to the palace. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, the king was trying to sleep. And Xerxes, he was having a bad case of insomnia. He couldn't get to sleep. And so he asked for the most boring, awful book to be read to him. That's my paraphrase. He didn't say that. But that book is the record of all the stuff that happened during King Xerxes' reign. All the stuff that happened in the empire. So the servant guy, he grabs the book, brings it down. He randomly, okay, I'll just go to a random page, opens it, starts reading a random story on that page, and it just so happens to be the record of the time that Mordecai revealed the plot to assassinate him. And so he's hearing, and Mordecai revealed this plot. And he goes, wait a second, did we ever reward that guy? Did we ever, give him anything? Servant goes, no, we never did anything. Oh, that is awful. We need to do something. But I'm really bad at planning things. Is there anyone out in the hall that we can get to consult on what to do for Mordecai? And they say, well, Haman's out in the hall. Good, bring Haman in here. Let's get him in on this. Haman comes in. King, I have a question for you. 1 second, I got to ask you. Okay, so I want to reward someone, and I want to do something really, really great for them. And Haman's thinking, well, you know, I just had dinner with the king and queen. Who is better in all the empire than me? Who would he want to reward other than me? So he says, here's what you should do, king. you should take your clothes that you have worn and put them on this man or woman. I don't know who you're wanting to honor. But you should put your clothes on him, and you should take your ring, your jewelry, and put them on him as well. And you should place him on a horse that only the king has ridden. And you should have all the high officials parade him around the city, shouting out, "This is what happens to the man who pleases the king." And the king's like, "That's a great idea. You're wonderful with this. You should plan you are great. You know what, Haman? Can you be in charge of that? Can you head that up? Get all the officials and everything. We got to do this for this guy. What's his name? Mordecai. We got to do this for Mordecai." "Sure, yeah, I can get right on that." "Right. Hey, Haman, what was that question you had for me?" "We'll get to it later. It's not important now. I got a lot of work to do, so I'm just going to go." So Haman ends up having to spend the entire day parading Mordecai around the city, shouting, "This is what happens to the man who pleases the king." And I mean, all the people who know that Haman hates Mordecai, I'm sure they're looking going, "Oh my gosh, he has to do that." He's a laughingstock. And so he just leaves that just completely embarrassed. But he goes, "Okay, I still have dinner with the king and queen. I can still, rally out of this." And so he goes to dinner, and he's sitting there, and now Esther decides to bring it up. She goes, "King Xerxes, those people, those Jews that everyone is supposed to exterminate, and everyone, they're horrible people and all that stuff. I'm one of them. I'm a Jew. So having that order is they're going to kill me and my family and all of my people. And it's this man, Haman, who was the mastermind behind the entire thing." So the king, he gets furious. He gets so mad that he actually has to leave the room, because I'm sure he was about to do something. And so he leaves the room, and it's just Haman and Esther in there. And Haman, he's scared. And so he's pleading with her. He's saying, "Please spare me. Please say something nice about me to the king. Please, please help me." And he gets up from his chair, runs over to her, and he trips. And he falls on her, just as Xerxes is coming back in the room. Awkward. Right? Xerxes is so furious. He's like, "Okay, we got to get rid of Haman. You're done. You're dead. I'm sorry. We're done." And someone yells out, "Hey, he was building a gallows to hang Mordecai. Hang him on the gallows that he built." I'm like, yeah, bad guy gets it. Right? And so then they figure out, they write another edict that goes out that says the Jews can defend themselves, and really helps the Jews out with that. And they end up, the day comes, they defend, there's a lot of fighting, all this stuff happens, and then every year they commemorate that event. And to this day, the Feast of Purim is celebrated to commemorate those days of fighting, those days of defending themselves, the days that they were saved from the hand of Haman. And that is the story of Esther. Now, what we have to ask ourselves in applying this to our lives is, to what extent is God working in the story of Esther? It's a book where he's never explicitly mentioned. It's never saying, God did this, God did that, God said this, and God orchestrated the events to make it. So to what extent is God working? Is he only kind of involved and making tweaks every once in a while? Or is he making every single thing move, or somewhere in between there? To what extent is God working? Because if we can answer that for the story of Esther, then we can answer that for our own lives. To what extent is God working? Based on the story of Esther, we can say, to what extent is God working in our own lives? Where we can look back at our lives and see, okay, so 13 years ago I had to move to Antelope. And all this stuff would happen, and eventually I would be standing up here and talking to you guys about all the things that God has done. To what extent is God working? See, I would say that God is working a great deal in the story of Esther and in our lives. Here's the thing. So many times we think to ourselves that we've screwed things up way too bad, that we have completely messed things up, that we are unredeemable. And we think God cannot work with our mistakes. God cannot work with all of my insecurities, all of my hang-ups. God cannot work in this situation. I'm just too far gone. And I would like to tell you otherwise. Because here's the thing. Why were the Jews in that place to begin with? Why were the Jews in danger of being exterminated to begin with? Because Mordecai was standing in the crowd and not bowing down to Haman. Why was Mordecai in Persia? Mordecai was supposed to go back with all the other Jews. They were supposed to return to Israel, or they were supposed to return to the land that God promised to Abraham. They were supposed to do things right this time, and so they were supposed to return, and God said, come back, and we're going to do this right. And Mordecai said, don't think I want to do what you want to do, God. Did God work through Mordecai's mistake? You better believe he did. God completely works through mistakes. And God actually did more than what Mordecai could have imagined. See, because Mordecai stayed, because Mordecai made that mistake, Esther was put into royal position. So she was able to intercede for the Jews and stand in their place and go before the king for that. But not only that, but she was able to have that position in the palace. She was able to have influence over those who were in the palace. She was able to have influence over Xerxes' children. Most notably, I would say, she would be able to have influence over Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, who 30 years later, after the story of Esther, would be approached by a Jew, his cupbearer, the man who would test his food and drinks for poison. And this Jew named Nehemiah would come to him and say, hey, can I go rebuild the walls of Jerusalem? How much influence do you think Esther had in his life? And God placed her there. See, I would go so far as to say if God hadn't placed Esther there, then Artaxerxes wouldn't have been so keen on letting Nehemiah leave and rebuild the walls. And if Nehemiah hadn't done that, then he and Ezra couldn't have led the people to return to God and live their lives completely devoted to him. And if the Jews hadn't been able to completely devote themselves to God, they wouldn't have gone so far the other way in the pendulum and devoted themselves so faithfully to the law of God that they missed the heart of God in the law. So that the tradition of the Pharisees would come through. So that years later, when the Messiah came, when Jesus comes in the flesh, they saw their Messiah but did not recognize him. The conditions were perfect for Jesus to come, be rejected by his own people, and take on death for our sin, for our mistakes. And we see the dominoes falling down one after another, and we can say, all because Mordecai disobeyed. Can God use our mistakes? You better believe he can. But let's look deeper. There's got to be more. To what extent is God working in the story of Esther? How much is he orchestrating events and making work out? I would go so far as to say that the story of redemption has a lot of similarities with the story of Esther. Because just like the story of Esther, we have one who goes before the throne of God to accuse us. Satan stands before God and he says, King, there's a people, these humans, and they're in your land. And they are rebellious. They're constantly disobeying you. They are constantly messing things up. They are a scourge. They are a plague. King, it would be much better for you if they were just out of the picture. If you let me, I'll take care of that for you. Just like the story of Esther, we also have one who boldly approaches the throne of the Father. He says, God, you know these people that he's accusing, these people that are so awful, I'm one of them. God took on human flesh, became one of us so that he could die a human death and rise again to new life, to bring us new life. And so he stands before the throne of the Father, interceding on our behalf and saying, I will take the blame. I will take their shame. I will take their punishment. To what extent was God working in the story of Esther? That he could weave the story of redemption, the story of the gospel, into 10 chapters in our Old Testament. So to what extent is God working in our own lives? Is the situation too big? Is it too out of control? Have we messed things up too much for God to work with? I would say absolutely not, because God does not take breaks. He doesn't leave and come back and go, whoa, I couldn't imagine things could get this bad. You did this? I can't do anything about that. No, God is right there with us. He is here with us as we are messing things up, as we are rebelling against him, as we are making good choices, as life throws its circumstances at us. God is here with us, and he's saying, I have a plan for that. To what extent is God working in our lives? I'd say intimately, in every single detail. God is with us, and he is working. And who knows but that you have come to your particular situation, to your particular position in life at this point for such time as this. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your working in our lives. I thank you that you did not leave us where we were, that you have not left us to sin and destruction. You have not left us in the kingdom of darkness, but that you have made a way for us. That you chose to redeem us and work in our lives. God, I thank you for who you are, for what you've done, what you continue to do, and I ask that you reveal to us the ways in which you're working in our lives. Just like the story of Esther, where we got to dig in there a little bit and find the ways that you're working, because you're not explicitly stated as working in there. God, we ask that you help us to dig into our own lives and look for the ways that you are working, not necessarily in flashes of lightning, peals of thunder, and fire raining from the sky, but God, in the little ways that you are taking control and taking charge and orchestrating the events of our lives. We love you, God. We thank you for this time, and we pray this in your name. Amen.